Joe Abercrombie continues to outdo himself, and I cannot get enough of his writing. Hey guys, it's Christian from Lost in Discovery, and today we are going to be reviewing Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. Am I holding up the book correctly? No, I'm not. We are going to be reviewing Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. Whatever, let's just leave it in. Best Served Cold is a standalone book set in the First Law universe. Now, you'll probably know Joe Abercrombie for the First Law trilogy, which I have reviewed on the channel. I loved that series, and Best Served Cold follows directly after the events of the First Law trilogy. And the first question is that will come to your mind: do I have to read the First Law trilogy before I read Best Served Cold? And Christian, are you going to spoil First Law trilogy in this review? No, I'm not going to spoil the First Law trilogy, and you don't necessarily have to read the trilogy before reading this book, but I feel like it's a huge detriment if you don't, because it follows directly after the events of the first three books, and knowing those events and knowing those characters and the world enhance this story to a whole other level for me. Guys, I adored this book. It was hilarious, it was bloody, it was insightful, it was beautifully written, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I finished this book in about 3 sittings. It was that good. So before we get into the review, I'll give you the pitch of the story. What is this story about? And in order to do that, I have to spoil the first chapter. That's just the nature of this. Without knowing what happens in the first chapter, I literally cannot tell you anything about this book. So our main protagonist is Mercenary Monscaro Mercato, which is a beautifully badass name, but she's just known as Monza for short. Monza is super close with her brother Benna, and they work for the Grand Duke of Talons. They're basically just fighting his battles for him, just putting out all the fires that a Grand Duke would have. The Grand Duke is pretty much like, hey, you guys are getting too popular, the public really loves you guys, and last time someone took this role, they were a very popular mercenary. Therefore, I've got to kill you both. And they are both completely killed and left for dead. Except Monza survives. There were 7 people involved that fateful night in her death and her brother's death, and Monza swears to herself that she is going to get cold-blooded revenge on these 7 bastards who killed her brother, and thus begins Best Served Cold. Now, if I had to sell this to anyone, I would say it's the most Tarantino-esque novel I've ever read, with the most beautifully bizarre and quirky British humour scenes, and with some of the most amazing and intimate and intriguing character work that I've read so far. Now, as Monza goes on her quest for revenge, she picks up other characters that join her, and one who I would consider just as much a protagonist as Monza would be Cole Shivers. Cole Shivers is a Northman, and he's come down south to put aside his barbaric ways, get an honest job working on a ship, and be a fisherman. But obviously, if you live in the First Law world, life ain't gonna be like that, and we're gonna get a bit more realistic about things. So Cole Shivers joins up with Monza because of money, what else, to help her on this journey. And being inside the head of Cole Shivers, a man who so desperately wants to let go of his violent ways and wants to become a better man, but is forced or found himself in a situation where it's just easier to start killing people for money, and just seeing how this plays on his mentality and how this breaks him down, and just Abercrombie writes this in such a gritty and personal way, in such a realistic tone, that it's just a depressing joy to read, if that makes any sense. And if you love quirky psychopaths and sociopaths, this is the book for you, because Monza's team that is helping her achieve these goals is the most entertaining cast of characters I've ever read in a book. We have Nikimo Koska, who is just a drunkard mercenary. We have Friendly, who is... Where do I begin with Friendly? Friendly is a big brute of a guy who spent much of his time locked up, and he's obsessed with mathematics and numbers, and he has these 2 little dice that he's constantly rolling and applying to the situation. If he rolls a 4 and there are 4 people in the room, he will literally get so happy and satisfied with that. And it creates some of the most hilarious and amazing scenes. And all it makes me think is, how the hell are you going to adapt some of Abercrombie's stuff? It's screaming to be adapted, but you have a character like Friendly who might say 3 lines in the entire book, but his internal dialogue of these dice and how it applies to the scenes is just fantastic. Now, whilst it is a bloody wild and hilarious ride the whole way through, this book I found incredibly insightful. Joe Abercrombie has a lot to say here beyond just incredible fight scenes and bloody moments and quirky, bizarre, hilarious kind of British humor. This book really beckons the question of what is the cost of revenge, and not at a surface level. It's completely visceral. How far will Monza go whilst almost destroying herself just to satisfy this need to clean up this list of 7 people and get rid of these people who killed her brother? And Abercrombie delves into this in such an intimate way. The way he writes character point of views is unlike any other author I've read, and I feel so close to these characters. I don't feel like I'm watching them. I feel like I'm in their heads. If they smell something, you smell it. If they do something, you feel like you're doing it. And if you are seeing something horrific through their eyes, you feel it. Being in Joe Abercrombie fashion, if they have an awkward sex scene, you're right there. If they have to go to the bathroom, that's a scene. And I adore that, because you just, even though they're clumsy and they're sociopaths and they're basically psychos, you end up developing a lot of empathy for these characters, because in the end, everyone's the protagonist of their own story. And in the end, everyone can convince themselves what they're doing is right. But the most brilliant part is they start questioning that. It's just written in such a way that is so gripping. And guys, I have to emphasize, I can find moments funny in books, but rarely do I ever laugh out loud. And no joke, I was laughing my ass off multiple times throughout this book, because some of the scenes, they're literally expertly written. There is one chapter called Sex and Death, which is just so aptly named in terms of just how Joe Abercrombie's stories tend to go. And it is a disaster it was like the most beautiful avalanche of destructive, awful moments done in such a hilarious way while still retaining the serious nature of the story. I just found it such a joy to read, and I really was so impressed with the way he wrote here. I loved his descriptions, and we're in the heads of pretty messed up people, right? So if you're writing from my perspective, if I saw something extremely red, I might compare it to a sports car. I might compare it to sunburn because I live in Australia. If people see a red jewel in this book, they'll say, oh, it looks as red as an open wound, or the sunset was the color of bad blood. It's just these awesome little touches that create such a fantastic tone in this story. In terms of pace, this story is blistering. There is almost no downtime, and the book is split into 7 parts, and pretty much every part resolves around the death or the killing or the attempt at killing one of these people on Monza's list. And with those constant goals in sight and constantly going to the next part and the next part, it kept the pace super snappy, and I never found the plot to be dragging or for me to be bored whatsoever. And if you read the First Law trilogy, it's such a treat because so many of the side characters make appearances, and even some of the main characters you'll hear being spoken about, and they could appear, but I'm not going to say anything. Reading this book, I just felt so thankful that I have started reading again, and I feel so thankful that people have recommended Joe Abercrombie to me, because Joe Abercrombie takes so much of what is quintessentially my tastes and delivers it in such a glorious way. Now, I want to stress to people, because your taste might not be the same as mine, I feel like in terms of tone, this one had a lot more humor than the original First Law, as far as I can remember it. And some of the moments are plain quirky, and maybe that will pull some people out of it, but it purely enhanced it for me. And having a scene where we're all eating dinner together and we are switching between each character and seeing what they're thinking about this scenario and how are they going to respond. Joe Abercrombie sets this in such an entertaining and valuable way. He values your time so much. You can tell by reading this. You can tell that he has tried to trim off as much fat as possible from this book and just give you a blistering, entertaining and thoughtful ride. And guys, if you can't tell already, I love this book, and it's my favorite book I've read all year. This is the book to top, and I kind of feel like Joe Abercrombie is going to be the person to top it as I go into the Heroes and the Age of Madness trilogy. I know I didn't get into spoilers here, but if you do want to talk spoilers, I'm happy to have a chat in the comments. There were some beautiful moments in this book, and for me it was just a lot of fun, and I really love how the world of First Law is beginning to progress, and I'm excited to see what Joe does in the following entries. Thank you guys so much for watching my review. Plenty more about Joe Abercrombie on my channel, and plenty other videos to watch if you are interested in anything fantasy related. Hope you guys are well, have a nice weekend, and I'll see you later. Bye.